Hi, everybody. How are you guys? My name is Kei Renee with the Culture Report. So, my question is going to be for Pierre, and then anyone else can chime in. There's a scene in the movie where I feel like there's an aha moment where Danny is in the living room. She had Lance hostage, and she's explaining to her bestie that she took this man hostage, and she said she had to do it to buy more time. And she's like, yeah, and you just bought some other time too. And I'm like, okay, message. So I feel like there's action versus consequence type of messaging that's within the film. So what other type of action versus consequent messaging do you feel that this film is portraying for the culture?
Well, actually, I want to defer that question to Tony because Tony helped to tighten the script towards when we were shooting it. And I think that I want to let him throw out because he had a lot of interesting perspective on the story and just how we could make it work for the budget that we had and still give a great quality story. So, Tony, I'm gonna let you take that one.
Thank you for that question. Can you, what the idea of consequence? Could you ask the question again specifically so I understand?
Yeah. So essentially, right, when we're in that scene, there's actions and consequences. So yes, she takes the detective hostage because she is trying to buy herself more time, but in reality, that's a federal offense. So it's like you bought yourself another type of time. So her friend has to explain to her, you have actions and consequences. And yes, you may have did this for a positive action, but it does have a negative consequence at the end. So what other type of action versus consequence messaging are we going to pick up in the film?
I would hope that we would pick up the action consequence of the differences of when you leave what you know, you reap those consequences when you stray away from your base, when you stray away from your roots, when you stray away from your community. I think you see very early on, Danny immediately reverts back to Felicia, and she immediately goes back to the community center, and she immediately goes back to Eastbridge effectively because that's what she knows, and those within that, the consequences really, those are the seeds of her survival. She uses the things that she knows, and those leads to her salvation, as opposed to not using the things that you know, which will lead to your destruction. And you can see on the other side of it, nobody can quite figure out on the corporate side, on the legal side, on the bad cop side of it all, where she is and what she's doing, because they're not connected to anything. They've disassociated themselves from the community. The community only exists to make money off of in an exploitive way. So really they are not a part of things. And so I think if there's one thing, there's one overall thing that I would push for, and there was something that we were always talking about, is what is everyone's connection to the community? What is everyone's connection to Eastbridge versus these sort of side suburbs, and how it affects their thinking. And even Lance, uh, we had talked about this a lot. Lance initially is embracing this other establishment ideology, and it takes him a while to get back on track. And it's not until the very end where he and Danny have this sort of they share this sort of anecdotal piece of information about how this mall they used to both go to, and boom, like that, they realize that they're the same person, and it really inspires him to apologize for getting the whole thing wrong. So does that answer it a little bit? I think that's a big thing.
Yeah. No, I think it's great because I mean it plays into even people having to self-reflect. And I think a lot of the characters had to do a lot of self-reflection in the film. So it definitely relates to that.
Yeah, and even at the end when uh Danny is talking with Lance when she says, "Oh, I wanted to change my life and I thought I was changing for the better, but look what happened." You can change your life, but not forget who you are, right? And that I thought was really, for me, a very pivotal moment, a great way of closing out the
Yeah,
story and the
yeah.
film.
Yeah, and I also think, to circle back to another question that was asked earlier, that this idea of what's going to happen now that this is all over, and Lance's whole response. Lance basically has two responses. One, by the way, I don't think I said this call. This is an amazing cast that I got to work with. They made my job so effing easy. So when you have that, and you have people that are this inventive and this smart, and this talented, they've elevated all of these things. And by the way, we're asking all of these questions as we were asking them. So as I'm saying these thematics. They were already way on top of all of those things. But at the very end, Lance has two things that he's dealing with. And one of the things with what's he going to do now? And the first thing is this admission that it's a mess. But the second thing is that, you know what, just because those people were liars doesn't make you a liar. And I think that's where Lance goes from there. And I don't know how he sorts things out. And I don't know if it's as dire as what Nadine says to Danny at the end. He goes, do you have any idea how big this is? Do you think you've solved a single thing with this? You get rid of me, I'm literally just another tool in this entire machine. You've done nothing effectively. But I think Lance probably takes a more holistic approach to it and says, I'm going to mind my own self. I'm going to be my own boss, and I'm going to start looking at things. And I think that's what Danny decides to do as well. And I think that's because I think they've finally gotten back to what's important. Ironically, in a community place called a mall, which is now like a graveyard effectively because it's empty, you know. So it is sort of like symbolically the death, this community's death. But it's deeper than that. And I think the roots show that. So getting back to the other idea about what's the cause and effect of this thing. I think the cause is when you embrace where you come from and remember what makes you rich, what makes you smart, what makes you whole. I think that tapestry is what ultimately serves to save you, and it's what saves her and what brings everybody together, who's on the right side anyway at the end.
Yeah, and Lance, I did see that you were nodding a lot in agreement with everything that he was saying about your character. Do you want to chime in?
No, I mean everything Tony said. It just hits deep. It's more than an action film and a thriller. Like it is about people and community. And yeah, like that last scene with Lance and Danny, he says just because you know these cops were bad doesn't make me a bad cop, and just because your situation is corrupt doesn't make you corrupt. And it's what we do with that information. And what they do with it after the credits roll, I don't know, but I have to imagine they'll stay the course. I hope they stay the course. But yeah, I guess they could be positive consequences to certain actions. And I think in the film, as Tony says, the more Danny goes back home, the more the actions and consequences are in her favor, the more she goes home.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to answer those questions. And everyone else, have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
You're welcome.